Hi, this is Abby from from Witchcraft and Criminal History. How you doing today? Good, that's good. But this is part two. I'm Graham Young, the teacup poisoner. Okay, as we spoke before, and I gave you a brief summary of his early childhood. When he was released to Broadmoor, he got a job at Hadlands. Hadlands was a photography plant. And as I said beforehand, he started poisoning people. And at Hadlands, and another particular factory had thallium, and thallium they use for photography. And I have a million guesses, guys, what poison Graham Young was interested by this time. Not long after he started work at Hadfields, people started getting ill. People started getting ill and they thought it was a viral bug. Little did they know it was Graham Young. His first fatality at Hadlands was Bob Eagle. Bob Eagle was a work colleague of Graham Young's, and Bob Eagle was friendly with him and became a good friend. And he was they were helping each other. Bob Eagle had absolutely no idea whatsoever that his new colleague, was actually poisoning him. People knew about Graham Young, but when they asked him about his past, they said that he was a failed chemistry student. And because they believed him, they thought, oh, that explains why he knows so much about poisons. And they didn't really put, one and one together. Eventually, Bob Eagle did die because of the poisoning. He was his first victim after being released from Broadmoor. His second victim was a guy by the name of Fred Biggs. Fred Biggs was actually about to transfer to another factory, and Graham Young was actually eventually going to get his job. So there was no need to poison him. But apparently Graham Young was poisoning about at least 10 other people. But as his work colleagues got sicker and sicker and sicker, he was taking notes. Eventually, the authorities came in to have a chat about them, to test the area to see whether there was any leakage, in the factory. But they were astonished. They were astonished that Graham Young was asking plenty of questions in regards to the poison and speaking a lot, which was highly unusual. This sent out red flags. But because of him being convicted, as a juvenile, they didn't really put one and one together, which is really, really sad. But eventually they did find out that Fred Biggs and Bob Eagle were poisoned by thallium. Graham Young was was charged and was prosecuted for murder, 2 counts of murder, and approximately, I think nearly about 10 counts of attempted murder. When he went to face the court were thinking about sending him back to Broadmoor. However, Graham Young actually pleaded not to be sent to Broadmoor, to be sent into a prison. And they granted his wish. He was sentenced to jail. You might think, oh, that's the end of that story. It's really, really interesting. Oh no, it's just beginning. When he went into prison, to say the least, This prison must have been the most unpopular prison in the UK. Because this was in the UK and this was the 1960s. This was the most unpopular prison ever. And what I mean by being unpopular, I do not mean that it is like Alcatraz back in its heyday. I'm not talking about that. It's not like, say, it's like Sing Sing. It is not like that. The reason why it was unpopular was because Graham Young was there. No one wanted to be in that prison, apart from one person, Ian Brady. And Ian Brady, as you may or may not know, is one of the Moors murderers. He actually shared a cell with Graham Young, and they were actually good friends. Because both of them read Mein Kampf, and they loved Nazism. They were obsessed with Nazis. Both Graham Young and Ian Brady. But apart from Ian Brady, no one in this prison wanted to be there. People who worked in the prison, like prison guards, other staff, they didn't want to go to work because of Graham Young. They did not want to go to work. And people who were in jail, they didn't want to be in jail. While Graham Young was still alive, the British government was actually getting a whole heap of requests from prisoners to be transferred from that particular prison. Because they wanted to stay well away from Graham Young. As from one prisoner has said, there's two different types of people who come from Broadmoor. You've got those ones who are trying to get the ticket out of prison by saying they're insane. Or you've got the ones that are literally insane, who won't even think twice to kill you. And Graham Young was literally insane. And Graham Young even pretty much said to himself that to him life was an experiment. That's all life was an experiment to him. And he was simply there to observe and see what happens. That is what, Graham Young did. And I wouldn't be too surprised if there was a lot of people trying to escape from that particular prison during the time Graham Young was there. Because, as I said, no one wanted to be near him. No one wanted to have tea with Graham Young. No one wanted anything to do with this guy. There was even reporters trying to write a book about Graham Young. But they would never, ever, 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 ever come in to see Graham Young. They'll speak to them over the phone, but they would refuse to physically meet Graham Young. That's how dangerous Graham Young is. And then personally, if you ask me personally, I think Graham Young is one of the worst and most dangerous serial killers ever to live. And he's definitely the worst serial killer over in the UK. Fair enough, he didn't kill that many people. He only killed 3 people and poisoned God knows how many others. 4 if you include that suspected suicide. But he was dangerous. But the sad thing was, if he used his intelligence in the other way, he could have used his intelligence for good and become a professor of toxicology. He could have used his genius for good, and he probably could have made a lot of money about it. A lot of money. But, sadly, he didn't. But here comes the real spooky part about Graham Young. When he was around between 40 and 50, I can't remember exactly his age, he died of a heart attack in his cell. Graham Young never had any history of heart disease. None. So it's weird that somebody died that young of a heart attack with no medical history. None. There's a lot of suspects. You got either one, it was a sheer fluke that he actually did have a heart attack and died of natural causes. That's one theory. Second theory was that he was murdered. Because as I said, no one in that prison wanted to be near Graham Young. No one. Neither the prisoners nor the guards wanted to be in that prison. And if it was murder, who was it? Was it his fellow inmates? Or was it the guards? Who knows? And then you got that other one. Suicide. Suicide would make sense. Graham Young could easily synthesize a poison which cannot be detected. He can get poison from literally anything he wanted. So it is fair to say that he could easily develop a poison in prison. Quite easily. And it would never be traced. Because he was isolated in prison. He didn't like being isolated. He wasn't like sent down, to isolation. He was literally isolated. He was in the main population, but he was isolated. Because no one wanted to be near him. They avoided him like the plague. So wherever Graham Young was, everyone wasn't. So he was extremely alone. He was all alone. With no one apart from Ian Brady to talk to. And for a psychopath, especially someone like Graham Young, that is the worst than death. So he had all means to commit suicide. Well, hopefully you enjoyed these videos on Graham Young. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and have a great day.